archives, and that was when there was like the whole women's community there, Ocento, and the women's bookstore, and Artemis Cafe, and that was just, that's a time that seems to be historical now because we're getting material about it.
That was San Francisco City Archivist Susan Goldstein. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. Every week on this podcast, you'll hear from historians, community leaders, bartenders, and San Franciscans from all walks of life, telling stories, sharing personal histories, and trying to put into words what makes this city so special. Welcome to episode 39, part 1. In this podcast, Susan walks us through the first half of her life, which involves leaving her childhood home in Southern California and moving around quite a bit. In 1984, she moved to the Bay Area, a place she says she was always attracted to, and found archiving work at SF State and with U.S. Senator Alan Cranston. She ends this episode going more in depth about her work at SF State, which brought her face to face with San Francisco's rich labor union history. Here's Susan.
So I left LA to go to college and got really into history, really into social history, really into women's history, really into working with primary source materials, going to other institutions and looking through the kinds of things that I collect now. And kind of, it just happened there. I just fell in love with it. Fell in love with the archives.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island.
Okay.
I grew up loving to read.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. Not necessarily loving history, but loving to read. No, it all started
How was Brown?
Brown was fantastic. Great. Never really been to the East Coast. Really exciting.
You learned what winter was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And summer.
That's all different, yeah.
Yeah. So very cool, very nice to be on a college campus while it's snowing. And amazing professors and really amazing women's studies and history professors. Mm-hmm. So
did you end up majoring in library science or?
No, undergrad is just AmCiv, as we call it at Brown.
American
Civilization. It's really history and literature combined.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And then when I left, I became a community organizer for Acorn. Yeah. And I moved to Arizona, Phoenix, lived there for a while. And then I moved to Austin. And I worked with low-income neighborhoods, organizing people, which is what I thought I really wanted to do.
When would this have been, roughly?
83.
Okay.
84.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Before Austin had a tech explosion.
Right.
Loved living in Austin. It was incredible. And then I realized maybe that wasn't for me. So I got a job at University of Texas in their photo archives. Mm-hmm. And then that really turned me on. The manuscripts were on a different floor, but the photo collection was amazing. So incredible. We used to pull out the 19th century pornography from England and France. People would keep these, their individual real photography porno books. Yeah, It's kind of interesting.
Well, photography was like brand new. They're like, what can we do with it?
Yes.
Yeah. We can have fun.
And the collections were incredible. Like some of the earliest photographs ever made were there. Very significant collections. So I got really into the concept of photo archives. Then,
what did you like about Austin? I'm curious for a reason.
Austin is Austin's beautiful. Austin has, Barton Springs and incredible music and great food. I mean, Austin is just, I don't know what it's like now. I haven't been there in so many years, but so much fun.
It's still at its core, and by core I mean literally like the middle of the town.
Right downtown there? Yeah.
It's still mostly awesome, I'm going to say.
Okay.
But it's a version of what's happening here.
Yeah.
We won't get into that, but
yeah.
But I do think there's kind of a
great community.
There's kind of a similar worldview mentality of anything we can call a community there, as there is to the Bay Area. There's a lot of comparison.
Yeah, no, it felt very similar to the Bay Area. But I'd always wanted to live in the Bay Area. I used to visit Bay Area when I was growing up in LA, and I was like, this is where I want to live. This place is so cool.
What did you like about it when you were a kid?
Like all the stereotypical, it feels so free. Oh, it feels so different. all the quaint Victorians. Oh, you can get around on public transit, which you can do in LA now, which is amazing. But, it just felt like such a different, special place. So when I left Austin, I just threw everything in the car and moved out here in 84, right in time for the Democratic Convention. Yeah, and my friends were living here, and we had a flat in the Mission. What did we pay? $150 a month for a room in a flat?
Was that a lot at the
Maybe $200?
time?
No, seemed very reasonable.
Yeah.
And then you looked for a job, right?
Where was your place in the Mission exactly? What, cost
I
you?
lived at, where did I first live? On South Van Ness, between 24th and 25th.
The phone booth.
That was on the corner. And then I moved to Guerrero, 1044 Guerrero. And then I ended up living on 25th Street, right around the corner.
Of course. So 3 different places in the Mission?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just kind of, this is what people do. You move here and you kind of move around.
Yeah. And friends lived in different places. And that was when there was the whole women's community there, Ocento, and the women's bookstore, and Artemis Cafe. And, that was just... That's a time that seems to be historical now because we're getting material about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's
full
very
circle.
Funny.
That's cool.
It's very funny to get stuff from your own life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Was the Dover Club still in the women's building at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
That's a little bit before my time. I know the post-women's building Dover, but not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you live in San Francisco.
So now I live in San Francisco. I get a job at... I get a job on an AIDS health project.
Okay.
Yeah, and I work out at Children's Hospital, and it's an epidemiological study. AIDS is all of a sudden coming into full swing, 84, and it's epidemiological study. And I'm working, as an administrative assistant, and I do that for a couple of years while I put myself through library school.
Sorry, just real quickly for those, and for a refresher for me, for those who don't know what epidemiological means.
So these docs, these clinicians were trying to look at where AIDS was coming from and how it spread in the community. And they were doing interviews every year with the same group of men, the same cohort of men over a period of years. And a lot of studies were published out of that initial study. Mm-hmm. And also people would receive their, if they were positive or negative during the course of the study.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's, again, also very relevant. We're working on an NEH grant, National Endowment for the Humanities grant right now. And we're digitizing early AIDS papers that we have in our collection. So it's kind of... it's kind of very moving.
Yeah. 84, was it called or referred to as AIDS?
Yeah,
yet?
I think it wasn't GRID anymore. I think it was AIDS by 84.
Right.
Yeah,
right. What
definitely.
was that like for you? I mean, I was very young, and I remember being it's scary that they don't know what's going on. And everyone's sick.
It was intense because, you hear people say it, but, people you knew all around you got sick and died. So one of the guys who was a phlebotomist on the study, he drew blood. He was one of my really good friends, and he ended up dying. He and his partner, both of them. People around you were sick and dying. It was pretty intense.
Yeah.
A lot of people were volunteering, and yeah.
Okay. What after for you? What would you do?
And then I thought, okay, I either want to do public health or I want to do archives. I go to library school. Public health, library school. Anyway, I applied to library school at UC Berkeley. Mm-hmm. And that's where I went to library school.
How was that?
That was okay. Wasn't a great program, but I had a really good archives teacher, and I enjoyed that, and kind of zipped through that program.
Did you keep living in the city when you went to school there? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I commuted in from here to there. Of course, as soon as I got a job in the city, I moved to the East Bay, but that's later down the line. Okay. So it was great, and I worked at the labor archives at San Francisco State a bit when I was there. It was kind of my first archives job, which was good experience. And
I'm guessing they have a pretty robust labor archives collection at SF State.
They do. They work directly with the unions. And I later worked for them on a 1-year grant from the feds where I went around and surveyed all the labor unions in the Bay Area. That was a fascinating grant.
Wow.
That was really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to go check that out. I actually went to school there for a minute back in the early 2000s, but I wasn't aware of that archive.
Oh, yeah. It's a good, and they have other stuff. They have, a collection of radical pamphlets that I worked on from, over the past 100 years, not just very recent. Mm-hmm. And they have great labor newspapers there. And I was very close to Lynn Bonfield, who founded them, who was their first executive director. But they're great. They do a great job over there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then my first job out of library school was working for Senator Alan Cranston. Mm-hmm. He was a U.S. Senator for 4 terms. So I ended up doing some work here, and then moving to Washington, D.C.
Oh.
And working in his offices there and getting to know all the staff and getting ready for his retirement.
Okay.
Papers.
And by then you're like, summer and winter I can handle because of your...
Oh, yeah.
And bugs. Yeah. More bugs probably in D.C.
More bugs. And really almost more... No, both were pretty humid. Yeah.
Right.
And a little more south, a little more humid.
Right.
D.C. was great. D.C. was kind of D.C. before it gentrified. It's kind of more fun now. But anyway, it was very interesting to work on the Hill.
I was going to say a different experience than anything you'd done.
Yeah. And I remember just stuff like there's a little car that takes you from the Senate building over to vote.
Is it really a little car?
It's an underground subway. It's an underground subway. And I remember not wanting to get in with Jesse Helms and his staff because they were so, homophobic and so horrible about AIDS.
Racist and terrible.
Yeah, but really that was about the AIDS thing then. And AIDS activists were sitting in at his office building there and chanting and, ACT UP was coming into being. Mm-hmm. So, there was a lot of, we think now is bad, but then was bad too.
Right. That was Reagan and a bunch of people
Reagan,
like Jesse Helms.
Twin Peaks. Yeah. So it was great to be there. And then I came back here and his papers went to Bancroft. So I was working on the papers for them here while he was retiring. And that was a big collection. There were about 7,000 cartons. And now if you look online, it's about 650 cartons.
Jeez.
So.
And you said he had 4 terms.
He had 4 terms, and he served on a lot of
6 years each.
Yeah,
so 24 years. That's
and he served on a lot of committees, as they all do, and also it was his early life before he was in the Senate, which was interesting. Mm-hmm. So you learn stuff you don't know.
Okay, so you came back and worked on essentially his. I guess is it a library for senators or what are they?
It's an archive.
They just call it.
And it's at the Bancroft at UC Berkeley.
Okay.
You can go
the
in
Alan
and
Cranston.
ask for his papers.
Okay.
Yeah, the Alan Cranston papers.
So you're working on basically establishing that or putting it together.
You're organizing all his stuff so researchers can use it and creating a guide to it. We call it a finding aid. Yeah. So we're doing all that stuff.
So you're really digging into archival work at this point.
Did you already my life.
Consider yourself an archivist at this point? Okay.
Yeah. As soon as I got out of library school.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that was, and then right in the middle of working for him for about a year, I went back to labor archives because they got this grant, and I went to all the labor unions and kind of famous labor people in the 5 Bay Area counties and did a big survey of what they had and how old it was and what kind of material it was. And then I went back for the final year of Cranston. So anyway, both of those were really interesting jobs. Okay. Visiting the labor unions was so interesting because some of them would have almost nothing. And then some of them, like the Teamsters, would have just incredible stuff going back to when they were dairy milk drivers, or draymen. That was what they were in the early days.
Draymen?
Yeah, those are people who drive horse carts.
Okay.
Because they were the Teamsters. They were drivers.
Right.
And so they drove all kinds of conveyances. And then you get into all these collections like the Waiters Union and the Separate Waitresses Union. Or I'd get into the Boilermakers, and they were incredibly racist back in the day. And then there'd be kind of trying to set up a separate union for African-American Boilermakers who were coming in during World War II. So it's just such interesting history in all those collections.
Yeah.
Really, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And I always like to think of the past as no matter how bad things are now, the past was always going to be more racist, more sexist, more homophobic.
There were moments, there were unions that weren't unions that weren't like that. And that's what a lot of people write about now. And it's pretty interesting. Like Alan Barrowby, who's a GLBT historian. He's dead now, but he wrote he was writing a great book. He didn't finish it, on Marine Cooks and Stewards, which was a very gay union during World War II, which was very unusual. So there are these little nuggets that are different. Or ILWU, warehousemen, they were very racially open and accepting union. They were really the one union that was quite progressive.
Right.
So, it really varies across the board.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. Yeah.
And so is that that labor archive at SF State, is that open to the public?
Yeah, it's open to the public.
You hear that, kids? Mm-hmm. Go check it out. And I'll do the same.
Really good. And it's in the main library building. It used to be off campus, but now it's in the main library building on campus. Yeah, they do great work.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what's next?
So then I go back to grad school.
Oh.
You weren't expecting that, were you?
I just have to ask, did you get on scholarships, or is it like more debt? Yay.
No, I had scholarship. I had grants.
Good,
yeah.
Good.
I had and then UC Santa Barbara, I went for master's in history, and I, taught. I was a TA. So and then I finished that.
Are you close with your family? Because you were closer. I'm assuming they still stayed back in.
They were in
that
LA.
Area?
Yeah.
So they're like, were they psyched to have you close, and then you're like, bye-bye again?
Well, I was in San Francisco. Right. I wasn't that far from them.
Yeah, but I meant in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I would probably drive down a little more often. Yeah.
But you finished that.
And then I got this job.
That was Susan Goldstein. Join us Thursday for part 2, when Susan will tell us all about her role as city archivist in San Francisco. Music for the podcast is by Otis McDonald. Film photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. You can find all 80-plus episodes on our website, storiedsf.com. And while you're there, you can also help support this project by going to our store page and checking out the different pledge levels. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date on everything we do. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the show for us. If you have ideas of who should be on the podcast, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.